A Lantern, Chapter 19. That fall, Dr. Hornby, Henry Lutz, and Will Deal went up to Omaha to interview the powers that were in regard to the railroad coming through Cedartown instead of farther to the north as the plan seemed to be. Later, the superintendent came down and was driven through the farming section by Henry Lutz. In consequence, Cedartown drew the branch line, and with many an expression of glee, figuratively made faces at the Weeping Water delegation which had worked against the southern route. Margaret's school year was a wonderful experience. There were 30 tuition pupils, about half from the town of Weeping Water and half from farm homes. The minister, in whose family Margaret stayed, had a nephew who was studying to be a doctor, who had come to visit his uncle. "His name is Fred Baker, and I wish you could know him, Mother," Margaret reported. "You never in your life saw such a fine young man." Abby wondered. In July of '86, the railroad was finished through to Lincoln, and now Cedartown would no longer sit on the prairie by herself. No longer would 23 miles of snowdrifts or deep ruts of mud lay between her and the capital city. Cedartown residents held their heads a little higher, spoke largely of train time and making connections for Omaha. Already the stones were in place for the foundation of the station. A train each way every day, mail in a sack being thrown carelessly out of a baggage car instead of from a pony's back. A telegraph machine clicking noisily in a 3-room station. What more metropolitan atmosphere could one desire? The day that the first train came through was a gala one. Word had been wafted about by some occult means that anyone who wanted to do so could ride to the end of the line free of charge. The entire Cedartown population, including 2 puppies and a cat, was on hand to pile hilariously into the boxcars and ride to the end of the road. Old A.Z. Drum took his hammer and his saw and his tobacco and drove over to the track with the deals, as he had just finished building another room to the rear of the house. Upon their return from the free railroad trip, Abby and Margaret began painting the pine woodwork in the new kitchen. Margaret, since her year in the academy, was a little fussy about the way things looked. Abby's plans for going back home that summer had gone into nothing on account of the new kitchen and the fact that she realized more and more that because Isabel was the musical one in the family, she must have an organ. The Lutzes were getting Emma a fine new piano, so Will bought their second-hand reed organ. On Isabel's 9th birthday, he brought it home in the lumber wagon. Isabel was beside herself with excitement. Her little legs pumped furiously up and down to get air into the creature's cloth lungs, and her little slender tapering fingers ran nimbly over the keys. Abby herself sat down and tried to pick out a few chords of an old song, but her fingers were stiff and clumsy. "By George, you're the one that ought to take lessons," Will said suddenly, "the way you always wanted." "No." Abby got up from the whirling carpet-covered stool. "No." Her lips trembled a little so that she did not look up. "At 40, it's too late." In the spring of '87, the community was presented with the first issue of the Cedartown Headlight, a small sheet with growing pains. It contained a great many items pertaining to the growth of our fair city. It was said that Mr. William Deal arrived in front of the editorial office in a fine new green lumber wagon with red wheels, that on April Fool's Day a cow of Mr. Oscar Lutz's presented him with twin calves, that a box social was held in the G.A.R. Hall, at which a good time was had by all. One gathered from an editorial that subscriptions could be paid with cobs, butchered beef, and money, but that the greatest of these was money. Crops continued to be good. Abby thought that this coming summer of '87 would prove to be the one which she could go back home. And then, before she was ready, she knew she was to be a mother. With Isabel, her youngest child, nearly 10, Abby thought she could not face motherhood again. Not at 41. "That means I won't go back to the academy, Mother," Margaret told her. But Abby said she would manage, that she had to manage somehow, for Margaret must finish. In the fall, with Will protesting a little, Margaret and John both went to Weeping Water to school. And in November, Maggie O'Connor Mackenzie died, without having seen Abby in 20 years. Bitterness came over Abby with her grief. Why should life on the prairie have demanded so much of her? Why should 20 years have been so hard, so barren? By her condition, both her grief and her bitterness were accentuated. At Christmas time, which was cold with deep snow, Margaret and John came home. Margaret with her grey eyes luminous, her cheeks flushed with prairie rose tints. She could not wait to tell her mother shyly that young Fred Baker, who was a nephew to the minister, had been there again. He had only 2 more years in medical school, and then he would be Dr. Fred Baker. He wanted her to write to him, and she liked him. Oh, how she liked him. And Abby wondered. John, serious, quiet, liked his work all right. Of all the children, John was the hardest to understand. One almost had to read his mind to get anything out of him. Mac, too, was home for the day. He had graduated from the broom and dust cloth and was on the books all the time. His round face, from which the freckles had miraculously disappeared, had taken on a more alert look. His round china blue eyes a keener expression. Isabel played and sang for them, way down upon the Swanee River, and Bonnie Charlie knew awa. Her childish voice soaring forth lustily, her slim legs pumping vigorously. Abby was thankful the children were all doing so well. Christmas over, Mac left for Omaha, and after New Year, Margaret and John went back to the academy. Elsa Reinmuller came over 3 mornings in the week to help. One afternoon on the 12th of January, Abby put her shawl over her shoulders and walked down the road to the Reinmullers. The day was like a spring one, a soft, mild spring day. "It's probably the last time I can go to any of the neighbors," she had said to Will, "and it will do Christine good to think I made the effort to come over once more to see her." The sun was warm. There was moisture on the sides of the cedars and the cottonwoods. Hens scratched in the damp, steaming ground on the south side of the straw stacks, their liege lords crowing ecstatically over their activities. Abby walked cumbersomely, heavy with child. It was hard for her at 41 to get about. The old buffalo trail of 20 years before, with its faintly outlined tracks, was a well-defined road now, running on to the big town of Lincoln, as straight as the crow, except for one short deviation, where it formed a letter S over the new Missouri Pacific Railroad. As she neared the Reinmuller house, Gus drove out of the yard with 2 of the younger boys on their way to town. Abby drew her shawl closer around her and called pleasantly, "Spring is here!" "Yah," shouted Gus. "She's come all right. Weather breeder, that's what she is. Yah, look at that." Pigeons had settled down before his horse's hooves to rise with a whir of wings and settle again. What did Gus mean? Was it a bad sign? Grandma Deal would have said it was. How queer that Gus used so much better English than Christine, Abby was thinking. It seemed that Christine didn't even try to talk right. She found Christine alone in the square box-like house which had replaced the dugout. The girls had gone over to Lutz's store, Christine said. Rosie was going to work at Dr. Hornby's. The 2 women talked for some time about trivial neighborhood things, beyond which they had little in common. Neighborliness caused by the proximity of their houses and the fact that they had come into the new country at the same time held them together. Christine was paradoxically rough and kind, penurious and unselfish. After a time, Abby rose laboriously and said she must go. At the door, she and Christine stood a few minutes in parting. The northern sky was the color of dark gray ashes. It was very quiet. the hushed quiet of a waiting storm god who gloats a little over the peace of nature before he assaults. Suddenly, Abby felt half frightened and did not know why. The great gray clouds were now coming in from the northwest, rolling low over the land like billows of thick smoke from 1,000 factories of the storm gods located somewhere beyond the prairie. A single snarling blast came out of the clouds, and needles of snow struck Abby in the face. Even while she hurried out of the yard, the wind was whipping her shawl about her, and a great smother of snow was engulfing her. "Come back, you!" Christine was at Abby's side. "No, Christine, I must get home." She had to say it close to Christine's ear in the roaring of the storm. Christine ran her arm through Abby's. "With you I go." Abby made a single feeble protest and then clung to Christine. In the welter of snow, they reached the far side of the road opposite the Reinmullers, and Christine, with her left arm hooked through Abby's, ran her right hand along the top of the wire fence for guidance. The wind lashed them until they cowered from it. The snow in great swirling masses drove its stinging claws into their eyes and nostrils. Irregular drifts formed at their feet in a moment's time. When there came one terrific blast of wind more infuriated than the others, Christine clung harder to the wire, the ugly barbs digging the flesh until the blood came. And then, the composition of the snow seemed to change. It was no longer even slightly pliable, but a cruel, hard, dry substance which cut at them like bullets, nails, and knives. Abby's strength in her present physical condition was going. She stopped and moaned at the necessity of pushing her cumbersome self into the jaws of the storm. Christine, with more wiry robustness, half-dragged the lagging body. Suddenly, the barbed wire gave place to picket, and Christine knew that the Deal's yard fence was reached. "Now, not so far," she shouted into Abby's ear. They wallowed, slackened, stopped altogether, crouched before the fury, and then gathered themselves together and plunged on again. Abby, with her waning strength, had ceased to think, except to obey Christine. And when the pickets ended abruptly in a post, with space beyond, and Christine realized that it was the open lane gate, and that she had unknowingly passed the small front gate. "Wait!" she shouted. But she had no reason to encourage Abby in waiting, for Abby had sunk into the icy bed of a huge drift with the pangs of childbirth upon her.